Throughout the Second World War there were many different executions carried out by the German army, but there were a number of heroic people who went to their deaths at the hands of the enemy during World War II, and their actions today are not the most well known. One young woman who made her way to the gallows being led by German soldiers was Lepa Radic, who at the age of just 17 was executed for shooting and firing at her enemies, the Wehrmacht. She was part of a resistance group that became one of the most effective of the conflict, and Lepa Radic operated quietly until she was captured. She was a defiant figure who today is seen as a hero of the Second World War, but what is her story, and what specifically did she do to play her role in the conflict? Join us today as we look at the defiance of Lepa Radic, and as always make sure to support our channel by subscribing. Lepa Radic herself was born to a Bosnian Serb family on the 19th of December 1925. She was raised near to Bosanska Gradiška, and her town today is found within modern-day Bosnia and Herzegovina. She was raised with communist ideas, and her uncle influenced her political ideas. She was an intelligent girl who was above her peers, and even at a young age she began to look into communism and the political beliefs championed by her family. At 15 she joined the League of Communist Youth of Yugoslavia, and she then became a member of the Communist Party of Yugoslavia. But at the time, in 1941, the Second World War had been going on for a couple of years. Hitler had rampaged throughout Poland and taken it, and had also caused chaos inside of France, but quickly he would turn his attention to the Soviet Union. Previously he had signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, in which he agreed to a ceasefire with the Soviets, but this would be ripped up, as ultimately he wanted to create more Lebensraum and living space for Germans towards the east. With this, a plan for Operation Barbarossa, the biggest military operation at the time in history, was drawn up. But inside of Yugoslavia, Hitler did have a slight issue. He would have wanted to take it, but the Kingdom of Yugoslavia tried to remain neutral as the Nazis began to build up their army, and they shared intelligence with the British. They then, in March 1941, signed the Tripartite Pact, which secured an agreement between Yugoslavia and the Axis powers, and then this allied them with Nazi Germany, Italy and Japan. Following this, a coup occurred in the military, and King Peter II was instilled as the head of the government despite being 17, and it was believed he would try and avoid playing a part in the conflict. As this occurred, the country became more nationalistic, and then Hitler stated that this new government backed by the British was an enemy government, and with this the Wehrmacht were ordered to invade Yugoslavia. Lepa Radic was just a teenager when this was all happening, and the Germans rampaged throughout Yugoslavia and forced a surrender within 11 days. They also made Croatia and Bosnia-Herzegovina into the independent state of Croatia, and Lepa's town was forced into this. Placed into power was Ustasha, who ruled over the nation with a reign of terror. They were incredibly brutal and oppressive, and were led by Ante Pavelic, and inside the country they carried out mass executions and acts of killing. They wanted to create an ethnically pure Croatia, and they saw Serbs as a big problem. They asked to kill 1/3 of all the Serbs in the lands, expelling and deporting 1/3, and also forcing the final third to convert to the Catholic faith. They used brutal acts of murder, and mobs would perform horrific killings and torture. They carried out the killings that were similar to those policies adopted by the Nazis during the Holocaust. But despite seizing control of the lands and then putting the Ustasha in power, one area of Yugoslavia that was difficult for the Germans to take was the mountainous regions. The Wehrmacht were not familiar with this area, and many people retreated to them to live, but also to form resistance elements and groups. The Partisans and the Chetniks came to the forefront, but they were limited as they did not unite their ideas, and instead they became enemies and they had different beliefs. Some Chetniks became hesitant to order acts of resistance as they feared what would happen to civilians in reprisal, but the Partisans became more forward with their actions. They did not like the more cautious Chetniks, and the Radic family hated living under the Ustasha's control, and many of them fled to go and join up with the partisan cause. Lepa's father and 2 uncles joined up in July 1941. They were later arrested and were freed inside of a Ustasha prison. But the Partisans did allow women and girls to join up to help, and many were placed into positions where they took up arms. And Lepa Radic also joined the Partisans, along with her sister Dara. They were very defiant and were staunch in defying the Axis powers and the Ustasha, and Lepa joined the 7th Partisan Company of the 2nd Gudrivski Detachment. Whilst inside of the group, she worked as a nurse and would tend to the wounds of injured partisan soldiers away from the battlefield, but then she was spotted as a talented young girl who could be used to draw more people, especially young boys and girls, towards a partisan cause. She had been involved in communist youth groups, and she used what she had learned to speak to younger people to try and recruit them and get them involved. But also she was part of leading groups of young partisans who would then harvest grain. They would do this daringly close to the German army and their barracks where they were based, but managed to not get caught and provided the partisans with valuable food supply. But partisans were often treated terribly if they were caught by either the Ustascha or the Nazis. If they were captured, they would be tortured brutally, then executed often in public, to send a clear message to the people around in the villages and towns not to rise up against the occupiers. But Lepa Radic became more involved in military operations of the partisans. In January 1943, the Nazis tried to crack down on the partisans. Their brutality in collaboration with the Chetniks then almost completely destroyed them, with mass killings and executions, but battles between the sides would erupt. One battle at Neretva saw Lepa Radic plunged into the heart of the battlefield, and she was helping to transport injured and wounded soldiers from the fighting to a hospital and shelter in Grumech. She also was helping to organise the evacuation efforts, and Lepa was trying to rescue as many people as she could. She knew that if she did not rescue every wounded person fighting for her cause, then they would be immediately executed by the Germans, who had no sympathy and would ruthlessly take their lives. So she helped to evacuate dozens of soldiers back to the hospital, where they were treated for their wounds, and she was doing an important job to maintain the numbers of the partisans and to keep them out of the hands of the enemy. But this was incredibly dangerous work under heavy fire. She continued to evacuate and transport partisans away from the battlefields, and she managed to fight on. In February 1943, she found herself fighting against the 7th SS Volunteer Mountain Division, Prince Eugen, who were very well trained. But during the fighting with partisans, Lepa Radic fell into the hands of the enemy. She was trying to save 100 women and children in the area, and was then seized whilst helping, but rather than hand herself over willingly, she picked up a weapon facing the SS Division. She took hold of the gun, and she then fired her rifle at the enemy, and she emptied her ammunition at them, until she ran out of bullets. But after this she was then overwhelmed and seized by the SS. But Lepa remained defiant. During her imprisonment, she was interrogated heavily about partisan activity, and she was tortured and kept in solitary confinement. She refused to give over any information, and because of this was deemed to have been a troublemaker, but also a lost cause, and the Germans only did one thing with those who refused to give over any information. They sentenced them to death. Lepa Radic was brought into Byzantska Krupa on the 8th of February 1943, and was taken from a prison by German guards, who took her into the town for her execution. A gallows had been made, and a rope had been tied to a tree, and under this rope and noose was a box, where Lepa would be led to. She was forced onto the box, and was then asked again to give over any information. She continued to refuse, even with the noose around her neck. As the noose was secured, she screamed to the people, "Long live the Communist Party and partisans! Fight, people, for your freedom! Do not surrender to the evildoers! I will be killed, but there are those who will avenge me." She was given one final time to live and to give over information, but she stayed defiant until the very end, and with this said, "I am not a traitor of my people. Those whom you are asking about will reveal themselves when they have succeeded in wiping out all of you evildoers to the last man." The German executioner then kicked out the box from underneath her, and Lepa Radic struggled for breath and was left hanging in front of the crowd. Shockingly, Lepa Radic was just 17 years old when she was executed, and the Germans wrote the report of her execution, calling her a bandit girl, and they said she showed unprecedented defiance. She was involved heavily in the resistance against the Germans, and her actions tried to save a number of partisans during the war. Following the conflict, she was celebrated as a hero of the Soviet Union, and is seen today as a figure who rose up in opposition against the evils of the Third Reich. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.